Everybody, it's Thursday, it's Litsoc, and this is the week before the school production, which this year is once again Oliver. And where will it be, girls?
The new Wimbledon Theatre.
The new Wimbledon Theatre, absolutely. And I know Juno's in it. Anybody else in it? Yes, good. Is it going well?
Yeah.
Exciting?
Yeah.
And are you excited for next week?
Yeah.
Great, excellent. Well, we're looking forward to seeing it. I'm going on Thursday with Mr. Humphreys, so looking forward to that. So we're going to be talking about this book, which it's based on. Oliver itself was written as a musical in the 1960s, and very popular it was too. And it was filmed, and it was restaged not that long ago, very successfully. Because it's got so many great parts, and it's a fabulous novel too. Obviously by Charles Dickens. Dickens was born in 1812 during the Napoleonic Wars. He is most associated with London and with Kent, but his father worked for the Navy, the Royal Navy. And therefore he knew Portsmouth really well. Portsmouth, do you remember the Portsmouth Road runs at the end of Palace Road, goes all the way to Portsmouth, and he would have been familiar with Portsmouth at a time when it was basically a naval port, a really important naval port. It's still an important naval port, but in the Napoleonic Wars even more so. So lots of different influences. Right, I'm going to get a bit of interaction with the audience. Anybody can tell me anything about Charles Dickens they know. Some of you are studying him at the moment or have, Annabelle?
He published a chapter at a time.
He did, yes. Do you know why?
So you could make more money.
He could, yes, that's right. Yes, absolutely. And also it meant that, what would that mean for his readers as well?
They have to wait and then read each chapter at a time.
Yes. Yeah.
And it makes them want to carry on reading it.
Absolutely. It meant that he had to influence his writing, didn't it? That he would leave each chapter on a cliffhanger. The only one of his books that didn't work like that was actually A Christmas Carol, because it works differently. And it was a very different edition. It was a proper Christmas book written exactly for Christmas. So Oliver Twist was only his second novel. And it deals with terrible poverty and criminality. Now, it's not set in the Victorian era, although we tend to think of Dickens as a Victorian author. The conditions that he's writing about, poverty, crime, abuse, neglect, what happens if you're in the workhouse. These days we'd call it care. It's better, much better, but because you do go to school, but Oliver was very badly treated. And the full name of the book is Oliver Twist, or The Parish Boy's Progress. Parish boy meaning that in the workhouse he was paid for by the place that he was born in. The householders, their local taxes would go to pay for the workhouse. And if you're studying Christmas Carol, this is one of the things Scrooge talks about. Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses where people could go and be looked after? But as Dickens knew well, they were a terrible place. They separated families. They didn't provide enough of anything. And at the end of an orphan's residence there, they could just end up going anywhere. And The Parish Boy's Progress is based on the novel, not the story, but the title of A Pilgrim's Progress. This is something quite different. And it was illustrated by George Cruikshank. So it's quite normal. It's quite normal for Dickens's novels to be illustrated, usually by George Cruikshank, and the captions sometimes are as they should be, sometimes they're sarcastic, but they explain what's going on. So, the blurb, this is the Penguin Classic version, says, the story of the orphan Oliver, who runs away from the workhouse to be taken in by a den of thieves, shocked readers with its depiction of a dark criminal underworld, peopled by vivid and memorable characters, the arch-villain Fagin, the artful Dodger, the menacing Bill Sykes, and the prostitute Nancy. Combining elements of Gothic romance, the Newgate novel, and a popular melodrama, Oliver Twist created an entirely new kind of fiction, scathing in its indictment of a cruel society and pervaded by an unforgettable sense of threat and mystery. Now, there is a mystery. Why is Oliver in the workhouse? What's happened to him to put him there? Where is the rest of his family since his mother has died? Do they not know about him? There's a very odd half-brother who doesn't make it into the musical, as far as I remember. Why, when he runs away from them, do the gang try and catch up with him again? Many memorable characters, Fagin and the Artful Dodger and Bill Sykes and Nancy, needless to say. And also what happens to Oliver as well. All sorts of things happen to him. Now, in the workhouse, can anybody tell me the most famous thing that Oliver ever asks for? It is food, and he wants
More.
He wants more. More, says Mr. Bumble, who is the superintendent of the workhouse along with his wife-to-be, because there isn't enough. All they're given, according to the novel, is a very thin gruel. So, Dickens sets this in a fictional town called Mudfog. And of course, one of the things about Dickens is that not only do the names of the characters caricature what they're like, so do the names of the places. So you can imagine what Mudfog is like, can't you? And a terrible thing had happened to his mother. She'd been turned out of her home and ended up at the workhouse and had to give birth to Oliver there. Okay. And we follow his progress, as it were. As you can see, it's quite a big book, okay, and lots happens. And there are various people that he gets involved with. Now, once he's left his apprenticeship to a coffin maker, Mr. Sowerby, because he fills out with the other apprentice called Noah Claypool, he finds himself on the way to London. And he falls in with... Who does he fall in with, girls? Can you tell me? Dodger, that's right. And who takes him back to meet? Fagin. Yeah, absolutely. Now, Fagin is depicted as Jewish, and it's not a very pleasant depiction at all. In fact, you can say it's very anti-Semitic. In the way of literature was in those days. It's not at all pleasant. Fagin has this gang, and they're all thieves. And one of the first things that Oliver is taught, or supposed to be taught by Dodger, is how to pick a pocket or two, according to the song. And what comes out... Anybody tell me what comes out of the pocket? No? Can't remember? It's a handkerchief, because they could sell them. And one of the odd things about Fagin's Den is how it's got handkerchiefs hung up all over it. You could, in Dickens's time, second-hand clothing, all sorts of things, because of the nature of the society, could be sold. And there were whole groups of roads in London where this was a fact. So I'll just read the description of Fagin's Den. The walls and ceiling of the room were perfectly black with age and dirt. There was a deal table before the fire, upon which was a candle stuck in a ginger beer bottle, 2 or 3 pewter pots, a loaf and butter, and a plate. In a frying pan which was on the fire and which was secured to the mantel shelf by a string, some sausages were cooking, and standing over them with a toasting fork in his hand was a very old shrivelled Jew, whose villainous and looking and repulsive face was obscured by a quantity of matted red hair. He was dressed in a greasy flannel gown, with his throat bare, and seemed to be dividing his attention between the frying pan and a clothes horse, over which a great number of silk handkerchiefs were hanging. Several rough beds made of old sacks were huddled side by side on the floor, and seated round the table were 4 or 5 boys, none older than the Dodger, smoking long clay pipes and drinking spirits with all the air of middle-aged men. These all crowded about their associate as he whispered a few words, and then turned round and grinned at Oliver, as did Fagin, toasting fork in hand. "This is him, Fagin," said Jack Dawkins, that's the real name of the Artful Dodger, "my friend Oliver Twist." So, one of the reasons that Oliver's taken in to the gang is because he looks so innocent. He seems to not have had any contact with real life at all. He's idealised. He has got beautiful, innocent face, and therefore he can go up to and get very close to people with money and handkerchiefs and charm them, as it were. And that's the idea, that by working together they can fleece or thieve from people who've got the money. And it is in Oliver's first instance that he comes across a person called Mr. Brownlow, who turns out, by some extraordinary coincidence, this is a plot spoiler, to be his grandfather. Hence the reason that the blurb says Gothic romance. Okay, and he's taken in by the police. He's arrested, and Mr. Brownlow takes pity on him, and eventually looks after him. And even more Gothic, Oliver is taken back to his house, which is in North London, which is very beautiful, very rich, and on the wall is a portrait, and Oliver seems to resemble. In fact, here's what it says: "There was its living copy. The eyes, the head, the mouth, every feature was the same. The expression was for the instant so precisely like that the minutest line seemed copied with an accuracy which was perfectly unearthly." And the old gentleman realises this. Oliver does not realise, because he faints away. After all, he's been so frightened and hungry. You'd think, right, well, it's all right now because grandfather's got him. But unfortunately, his gang, as it were, his old gang, come after him. And we hear the adventures of Nancy, Bill Sykes, and Fagin, who all eventually get their comeuppance. But poor Nancy is also, for her pains, murdered. Now, it's a not so much popular book these days, but it's certainly very popular in its adaptations. It was done on the BBC not that long ago. Its first filming was right at the birth of film in the early 1900s, and it's continued to be filmed over and over again, as lots and lots of Dickens books have, because it's it's really the one of the classic plots of literature, the discovery of the lost heir, a mystery cleared up, and also it's to some extent, those of you who've done GCSE English and doing A-level English, a Bildungsroman. Holly, can you remind me what a Bildungsroman is?
It's like when the character grows up throughout the novel and the reader learns the lessons as they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Lovely explanation. We see the character growing up throughout the novel, learning, and we learn along with them. And also there's quite often a lesson drawn as well. And of course, Dickens is his characters are very vivid. A lot of them live outside his novels. They've got a life beyond the novels, like so many Victorian writers. Even if one doesn't know what they've said or what part they play in the novel, we know the names. A few years ago, they did a whole new series called Dickensian, where all the characters were put into a completely new plot. It all turned on the death of Jacob Marley, but they brought all their plots with them to some extent and characterisations. And Fagin was one of them, and Bill Sykes. Don't think we saw Oliver. No, and of course. Those reading it love the depiction of the big city that they were living in all its horrors and criminality. And sadly, of course, in the era before Victoria and during Victorian times, there was a lot of criminality because there was no social net. The only people that would help were workhouses, prisons and charities, and there weren't that many of those. The government really didn't take much help for the poor, and therefore the poor had to turn to being criminals in order to feed their families. Schooling, you had to pay for it. Doctors, you had to pay for it. Hospitals, you had to pay. It was pretty grim. We should be very lucky. I think we're very lucky to live when we do. And once you went into the workhouse, you were very lucky to come out again if you either had to be helped by somebody or managed somehow to pay off all your debts. It was there for those who could not help themselves. Okay, so Oliver has got a happy ending. You'll be pleased to know. Everybody's reconciled, although Bill Sykes ends up dead, and so does Fagin, poor thing. And the Artful Dodger is transported to Australia, which is, of course, where so many criminals were sent during this period to get them to leave England. Oliver finds he has an aunt. He finds he has a grandfather. He has proper friends, and goes on to lead a good life, as everybody wanted him to be. So he's one of Dickens's sort of good innocent characters, a bit like Little Nell in the Old Curiosity Shop, and of course everybody. Once you'd bought your edition of the magazine, Household Words, you wanted to know what happened next, and so it became really popular. And the illustrations made it even more vivid, because of course in those days you couldn't see it on the television or a film, but it was put on stage very frequently. Right, there's Bill's last moments. Okay, because basically what happens is he's used a rope to get himself onto the roof, and then he manages to slip and hang himself. And there's a great mob at the bottom watching this happen. So the bad end badly and the good end happily, as all moral novels do so. And it really, again, contributed to Dickens's fame. And it wasn't just read by ordinary people; it was read by the great and the good as well. And Dickens's work made a difference to what the government did. Trying to, because that was Dickens's purpose, to tell those who were ignorant don't forget, no internet, only journalism and magazines, although they were very informative. It was a way of getting across his message. And he knew that about a lot about government because he'd been he'd worked in Parliament as a reporter, taking down what was going on in the early part of his career. So that's how his novels come to be, to have so many messages. Okay, so Oliver Twist was published in 1838, so it's not long after the first Great Reform Act. He followed it up with Nicholas Nickleby, which is his great novels about schooling and the horrors of Victorian schools. And of course, Christmas Carol is published in 1843. I like Oliver Twist, but I don't think it's his greatest novel. My feeling is his greatest novel is Bleak House, but maybe I'm biased. Let's hear from those who are in the show. Juno, what do you like about the show?
I like the fact that it has like some of the songs that you kind of already know, plus new ones, which I didn't know, but I really like.
Any particular favourites?
I really like Be Back Soon, which I didn't know before being in the show. And also it seems like, from the bits that I've seen, it seems like quite light and funny, but also still gets like all of the messages across, which I think is really good.
Yeah. And in the end, do we see Bill get his comeuppance?
I think so. I haven't actually seen the whole thing.
When you're not seeing the whole thing yet.
Yeah, because I'm in the ensemble, so we don't really see the acting that much.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Will you be able to watch the dress rehearsal next week?
Well,
or will
yeah.
you be off stage, backstage
Probably.
as well?
I'm not entirely sure. We might be off stage for the bits that we're not,
Right.
because my ensemble's on for a while and then off for the rest.
Okay, all right. And the ensemble, so you're playing...
Yeah, part of Fagin's gang.
Part of Fagin's gang, right, okay. And it's both dancing and singing, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. It's very tuneful, isn't it? And very memorable. Okay, right. Who else is in it? Sophia? Go on, tell us about it.
And it's a really nice story. It's very it gets very good messages across. I'd say probably my favourite songs are Papa, which I'm in, and That's Your Funeral, which I've watched a couple of times. It's very funny.
Okay, and Papa is set in the pub, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, with Nancy.
With Nancy, yeah.
And who's the other person who's in? Who's
Pat.
Pat, that's right. Yes, yeah. Yeah, that's really memorable. And the funeral is to do with Mr. Sowerby's.
Yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Sowerby.
Yeah. And Nancy, what's her purpose in the show in the
Well, from what I understand is Nancy is obviously, she and Bill Sikes are together, and she's sort of and she sort of helps Fagin and Bill Sikes at times, but I think at the end she sort of tries and helps Oliver and ends up dying, sadly.
Yes, seems to be the fate of women in Dickens's novels.
Yeah.
But she's almost a reform. She almost reforms
Yeah.
herself, doesn't she?
Yeah, she tries to help Oliver and Mr. Brownlow.
Yeah. So she's got a lot of empathy that you might not expect, really. Yeah. Yes, it's sort of gold-hearted, isn't she? It's good. Okay, Sophia, what are you playing?
Part of Fagin's gang.
You're
as
part of
well.
Fagin's gang too. Okay,
Yeah.
so have you both had to learn how to pick a pocket, or are you just singing the song?
I just sing the songs, but we're going to be in the background for the whole middle of the show.
Right, cool. Yeah, good. Okay, and we get the street scenes as well. It's a long time since I've seen it.
I think it's kind of in the middle of another song, so it's kind of with the in between. So there's music playing underneath for a few
Yeah.
minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because that's the one thing about Dickens, in all his novels you get extraordinary street scenes. It's as if you're there watching all this crowd buying, selling, moving around London. And of course the lovely thing about Dickens also is that you can go to London and still walk where he walked. A lot of it's changed, but there are still areas that he knew well. He was a great one for walking late at night, had an awful lot of energy, and I suppose if you're writing a lot of the day, then you want to burn it off. And when he lived in London, he had a house for his family in Bloomsbury and then in Marylebone, but he also always, he knew how to spend money, he usually had another apartment where he'd entertain his friends, his male friends, and that usually was somewhere around Covent Garden. So if you know Covent Garden at all, I used to work there in King Street. Henrietta Street is where he had an apartment, and so he would perhaps leave there in the early hours of the morning, walk miles and miles to burn off his energy, and just observe those who were living on the streets or, you know, around and about. There's one of the books, Our Mutual Friend. He actually set some of it in a refuse tip. And a whole sort of story to do with the will is set in this rubbish collector's yard. Also, he was clearly very familiar with the River Thames, not the Thames obviously, I mean our Thames, but a filthy, revolting place where corpses washed up and people committed suicide in, and there were boatmen and boatwomen, not of the kind you see today, of the barges and sort of leisure craft, but people who plied their trade and took people out to ships, and of course the docks were not as they are now. They were working, bringing in goods from all over the empire, and of course he lived from 1812 to 1868, so he would have seen the vast expansion of London as the centre of this massive empire under Victoria. And we see it all in his books. It's enormous energy and also these extraordinary stories about different characters, and Oliver is part of that. And I think one of the saddest things is how he tells us about the Victorian underclass and how in order to survive they had to become criminals because they weren't educated. There was no way they could move out of their horror of their lives because nobody cared and there was no education. This is where Oliver this is sort of like a fairy tale. He's so lucky because he's saved by his grandfather, and he seems to have sort of acquired knowledge and literacy almost by default, doesn't he? It's quite extraordinary, really. As it is, as I say, it's a bit of a fairy tale, but it's a very vivid novel. So who's studying Christmas Carol here? Annabelle. Yes, you are, Sophia. So are you enjoying this?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I don't actually know the storyline of Christmas Carol. Yeah, I know.
Oh, good. That's nice.
Makes it
more
my mum
exciting.
said that I watched it when I was little, but I don't remember it. And then we're quite studying it in quite depth, so it's quite nice to not know the story.
Yes, it
Only on
must
stage
be.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we've gotten to the bit where I don't know about Annabelle or Sophia's class, but in my class we've gotten to the bit where he sees Marley's ghost.
Yeah, we're at that bit as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've watched 2 versions of it, so I know the storyline.
Mm-hmm. Sophia, have you seen it on film, or were you just reading it with me?
Just
reading it with me.
Oh, that's so interesting. I would have thought.
Yeah.
There's so many different versions of it now. I kind of just assumed everyone would have seen something. But
Yeah. You probably have seen Annabelle, but you don't remember.
that's a good way to do it.
I can't imagine that your mum, who's very good with your reading and what have you, but
It's quite
probably a
classic
long time
Christmas
ago.
I probably
film
watched
everyone.
it like when I was like 5 years
The best
old.
version is the
I don't
Muppets
remember.
Christmas Carol.
I've watched
so-
that one.
Great.
I've watched I've watched that one.
The
and then one
Muppets
other,
are
but I don't-
scary though.
Oh well,
Really
that's yeah
creepy.
okay. That's
I don't
can
like
see
the
that might be
Muppets.
appropriate.
But my dad and my sister like watching.
I like the
them.
Muppets.
like
Why
the
don't you like the
Muppets.
Muppets?
I don't know.
They're really
They're-
low.
I don't like how they mix them like the Muppets with the
With real people.
and I don't know
Yeah.
why, but it bugs me. It bugs me that like there are Muppets talking to people,
Yeah.
and it's just like normal.
Oh well, you
That's
see, when
not normal.
if you're brought
They
up
all
with
have to
Sesame
be
Street,
Muppets.
then you get
I
used
was,
to it.
and also some of the characters are a bit strange.
Well, they are. Yes, they are.
They
Yeah,
either
but-
all have to be Muppets or all have to be humans. It doesn't make sense. That's like putting some dogs with some cats and saying, "Oh, we sell cats here. Oh, and a few dogs as well." Just,
Well, that's what pet shops do. They
yeah,
do.
but then if
this
it
is
was
a
like
pet
a
shop.
cat pet shop, and then you go and there's like, "Why are there dogs in here?"
It would
And
be
they're like,
worse
"Oh,
if
we do those as
there
well."
was a human that was also a Muppet. That would be even more scary. It's better to have one on the other shore.
I'm glad there are no human Muppets.
Yeah.
But some of the Muppets are okay, but some of them kind of freak
Oh,
me
well,
out.
I'm very
Yeah.
sorry that you don't like them because they're my. I love
I
them.
love them
I just
too,
love
yeah.
them. They make me laugh and laugh, and they just and also Kermit and Robin, his nephew, do some lovely songs. So
That's true.
Fozzie's got wonderful sense of humour, which always fails, and just the band, and Gonzo, who's an unsuccessful acrobat, who plays Charles Dickens in The Christmas Carol. So it's very funny, and I can see that in A Christmas Carol you wouldn't perhaps like the vegetables, because the vegetables are alive too.
Oh yeah, I
They
watched
are.
it ages ago.
The
Yeah.
vegetables are alive.
Yeah, the vegetables are Muppets, but alive.
You need to watch it this Christmas, Annabelle. Now I know the story.
Yeah.
You're very lucky. You might end up watching it in English. So.
True.
The vegetables are alive.
In fact, there's another film now
Everything's a
with the actor who was in Beauty and the Beast about how Christmas Carol came to be written.
Oh, I saw that a few years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, it's idealised and it's fabulised, but Scrooge is a real character, and so are the others as well. But I think for Oliver Twist, certainly the musical is still the most famous. We haven't had a new film yet, which I find quite surprising. But
Yeah, there hasn't been an Oliver for a while.
no.
There's a film probably about 15 years ago now.
Yeah, we've had a BBC adaptation very
was the
recently,
non-musical
but not
one.
the musical version. No,
The
no.
one from the 70s is the one I always think of.
Yeah,
That's the most.
yeah.
Maybe we're due one.
I think we're due another one. So yes, mind you, the trouble is musicals are so expensive to get put on now. So yeah.
There was that TV show, what was it called? Dickensian. Did you speak?
Yes, that's the one I was just
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah.
Yeah,
And it was
Yeah.
all the characters
all
together.
characters
which was
together.
quite good.
Yeah, absolutely. Very sinister, actually.
Yeah, it was a bit dark.
Yes. Yeah, although not as dark as the last Christmas Carol.
That's true.
Oh,
I never watched that one. I
No,
didn't like the look of
mm,
it.
better not to. Better not to. So, what were other strange things about Dickens? He had enormous energy. He could be known to walk all the way to Kent over a couple of days, where he had a house. He had a pet raven at one point. He had a very embarrassing father who kept getting into debt, spending money, which he didn't have. Charles Dickens liked to spend money as well, but he always had the means to make it again with the writing. I think probably the worst thing about Dickens is the way that he treated his wife. I don't want to go into too many details, but it was awful. Yes, he was involved in a train crash. Did anybody know? Did you know this? You knew, because I told you, taught you, made sure we knew. Yes, he. The trains, of course, Dickens watched them becoming a big part of Britain. travelled by them frequently. And in Dombey and Son, he talks about the immense destruction towns faced while railways were being built, because houses had to be demolished, people were chucked out of their homes, and it was sort of like a juggernaut taking over. And then he, late on in his life, about 2 years before he died, he was involved in this train crash in Kent. He was coming back from France, and he was unharmed but severely shaken, shocked, and he had to help people, because they were out in the countryside, people as they basically lay dying and were very badly injured in the crash. And although he wasn't badly injured, it clearly had a great effect on him. And he went on to write a very famous ghost story called The Signalman, which some of you might be familiar with. It's set in a very deep cutting, bit like how as you come into Surbiton, so the walls of the banks get higher and higher, and there's the bridge on St Mark's Hill, and the signalman is at the bottom, and he has to keep the line clear, but he keeps hearing this bell, and he can't, and the figure at the tunnel, and he can't make out what's going on. There seems to be no explanation for it. There's no message. Things are happening on the line, bad things, but he cannot see it as a warning. Anyway, eventually he's run down by a train, and the person he's told this story to suddenly understands who this figure was that he was seeing before him. It's a very atmospheric story, very full of sort of odd hints, but clearly influenced by the train crash, a very bad train crash that happened in Sussex, and also the one that he was familiar with at the time. So the thing about Dickens is he's known for his social commentary, he's known for his social criticism as well, and his depiction of very ordinary people in very difficult circumstances is well worth exploring his novels. Some of them are, not necessarily easy to access, but they're great plots if you can do so. Because he never forgot what happened to him as a young boy. His parents, his father fell into debt. He was put in the Marshalsea. They were put in the Marshalsea prison, and poor Dickens, he could have gone in with them, but his father managed to get him a job with a family friend in a factory. But Dickens had been at school. He'd never experienced anything like this, and it was horrific for him. So he felt this really strongly, being left alone, having to work, and it was repetitive work, perhaps being teased by the other boys, made to feel, out of place, adjusting. So he never forgot the real poverty that he'd seen and could see on the streets of London, and he and other authors tried to help the poor. He was a great, what we call, philanthropist. He gave a lot to charity, and as I say, tried to educate the public as well about what was going on in streets very close to their own. So it's well worth it, and try and get to see the show if you can, because it's going to be a great time, isn't it? So we wish you all the best, and there's no Litsoc next week because it's happening, so break a leg, as they say. So we'll see you in a fortnight's time, everybody. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. Okay, thanks very much. Okay.